Bryan Hoch, a great book that's out right now. The new book is entitled The Baby Bombers, and again, it's available right now. The inside story of the next Yankees dynasty. Does a great job for MLB.com, covering baseball and the Yankees as well. Kind enough to join me on a couple minutes on a Wednesday. Bryan, appreciate a couple moments. Congrats on the book, my friend.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm out here at Yankee Stadium. We're looking at the tarp on the field, and we'll see if we get this one in today against the Rays. But hopeful we can see some baseball this afternoon.
It's been horrible, too. I mean, snow the other day, and the Mets had to deal with the bad weather up and down the East Coast. I mean, it's just April. We're supposed to get nice sun, warm, sunny days in April, and instead, welcome to East Coast baseball. Let me ask you something. I'm just curious, what was the idea and the sentiment behind this book? Because when you really think about it, the one thing that stands out is years ago, the Yankees, that is, were able to really just grow their talent within, with the Bernies and the Pettits and the Jeters and the whatnot and Riveras. And now you look at some of these younger guys, Judge, Sanchez, Bird, Severino. I mean, listen, there's also homegrown talent. So what made you decide right now is the perfect time to do a little research and come up with the Baby Bombers?
Sure. Well, I think there's a lot of parallels you can draw between what we saw in 2017 and those 96 Yankees, the 95 Yankees that you're talking about, which is when you saw guys like Derek Jeter and Jorge Posada and Andy Pettitte, Mariano come up and get a taste of the big leagues and start to experience that stardom. And then obviously they won that World Series in 96 under Joe Torre. I think that there were a lot of parallels between that. You're almost on the ground floor of something special happening in the Bronx last season. And to give you some background on the book, there weren't a lot of expectations coming into the 2017 season. People were talking about it's going to be a rebuilding year.
Mm-hmm.
The Yankees might finish below 500 for the first time since the early 1990s. And then you looked up at the All-Star break, and Aaron Judge is becoming one of the stars of baseball, one of the real faces of baseball. He's got 30 home runs at the break. He wins the home run derby. And so we started kicking around ideas about a book, and the more we talked about it, I realized that there was a broader story I wanted to tell. And what the book really is, it's how the Derek Jeter Yankees transitioned into the Aaron Judge Yankees that really connected with fans last season.
And I mentioned this in the top of the show with the opening monologue. We've seen this sometimes, too. When dynasties start to end, you have to have a little patience, but it's 180. We know sports is cynical. And then all of a sudden, you start to grow homegrown talent, and it might take a little bit of time. But as you alluded to, listen, it kind of like a shot out of a cannon last year, especially when you look at the season that Judge had, and it was a historic season for a young player. I don't think a ton of people saw this coming. And then kind of illustrate what you said, and you mentioned in the book as well, it's because people sometimes, I guess as fans, you almost lose patience at times. But when you make that transition, there's going to be some growing pains. But last year was a rarity because, again, as you mentioned, there were really no growing. I mean, there were growing pains, but no one saw the type of season that they were going to put together. I mean, no one really saw it coming.
Yeah, I think that on one hand, you're right in that it did happen ahead of schedule. Nobody could have predicted that Aaron Judge was going to hit 52 home runs and be a unanimous AL Rookie of the Year and finish second in the MVP race, that Luis Severino would step up as the ace of this team. I mean, there were people who questioned the fact, should he even be a starting pitcher going into last season? And people thought that maybe he's just best served to be in the bullpen. And not only did he turn out to be a starting pitcher, he convinced everybody of that, but he's the Yankees ace now. And so I think that there were a lot of things that had to go right for the Yankees in 2017 to wind up one win away from the World Series. But this has been a transition that's been going on for a long time here. You had the fading out of the core four. I think when Derek Jeter's ankle broke in that playoff game against the Tigers, that was the last gasp there. And because then after that, they missed the playoffs 3 out of 4 years. You saw a transition going on here where the Yankees sold off some of their veterans in 2016, which would have been unheard of for previous regime. But it was really a smart move for Brian Cashman and Hal Steinbrenner to do that because it really accelerated the rebuilding process and helped deliver them to what happened last year on the field.
Yeah, and coincidentally, when you talk about the core four with Jeter, Pettitte, Posada, Rivera, they all start in the early 90s. They played together in the minors. They make their Yankee debut in 1995. And that's the one thing when you talk about some of these younger players right now, it's the only uniform they've ever wore. So, it's also another testament when you think about it, smart management, good player development. Judge, Sanchez, Severino, Gardner, Bird, Betances, Montgomery, they've never suited up for another organization. So, again, we start to also put the credit on what Cashman has been able to do as well. And people think right away, well, they're always buying players. Well, that's not really necessarily the case here.
No, I think there's some truth to that there is a real appeal when you can get guys into your own pipeline and graduate them through the farm system, because you teach them the quote-unquote Yankee way to do things. You prepare them to be in New York from their first days when they are drafted, and they go play in Charleston and Tampa and Trenton, and there's a real camaraderie between these guys. You see it. You saw it in the dugout last year. There was a real sense, I think, it came through to the fans that these guys enjoyed playing together. They made some smart moves to bring in guys from outside. A player like Didi Gregorius didn't come up through their farm system, but he has solidified the middle of their infield, for example. So they've had some contributions from outside the organization. The big move of the offseason, they go out and get Giancarlo Stanton, who starred for 8 years with the Marlins. But I think you had that base of guys who know the Yankee way. And one thing that I hope comes through in the book, too, is the connection that the current Yankees have to past Yankees teams. And you always see it, just going through the clubhouse in spring training. You walk through, and not only is Judge and Sanchez and Severino there, but Willie Randolph is there, and Reggie Jackson, and Nick Swisher is coming through the clubhouse. So there's always a connection between the Yankees of the past and the Yankees of today. I think that's one thing the Yankees are really good about, is making those guys available so they are able to pass on what they experienced and send that to the next generation.
The one thing I noticed last year is that when you're a young player and all is well, especially when you play in the New York market, the fans and media loves you. It can quickly turn if you're in a 1-for-31 slump. We saw Judge kind of hit that wall a little bit and then start to regroup. I'm curious, what was your first read impressions on Aaron Judge? Because from everyone that I speak to, it's the way he carries and handles himself. Really, for a young guy, he almost speaks as though he's a 15-year vet.
Yeah, he's got a good head on his shoulders, and there's a quote in the book where Joe Girardi compares his temperament to that of Derek Jeter, and to be honest with you, I saw that a couple weeks before Girardi even said that in a press conference here at Yankee Stadium. I remember thinking it during an interview with Judge, and I said, there's a lot of Derek Jeter in this kid, and obviously they're completely different players on the field. One was a shortstop and one's a power-hitting right fielder, but I think that they have the right temperament. They were raised the right way. I think it comes back to the way that Judge was raised by his parents out there in California, his adopted foster parents, Patty and Wayne. You talk to people who have popped up in Aaron Judge's life going back to high school and college, and they all come away with the same thing. There's a polite, respectful kid who has a good head on his shoulders. He was taught that you're not supposed to use the words I or me. That was an ongoing thing at Fresno State, and he's kind of carried that on. It's all about the team, and I think that's part of the reason why he's transitioned so well into this clubhouse and why the people of New York have really embraced him. It's funny for me. I was there the day that Judge was working out with the team in Oakland. He had just been drafted, and the team invited him to come out and put on some shorts and a T-shirt and work out in center field with them. And to now see him 5 years later, and there's a big billboard of him in Times Square, it's pretty crazy to see how quickly that has all developed for him. But he's a good kid, and he's certainly somebody that you don't feel bad rooting for.
Again, a couple minutes. Bryan Hoch does a great job, MLB, MLB.com. Did a wonderful job chronicling the story in his new book, The Baby Bombers, Inside Story of the New Yankees Dynasty, forwarded by Mark Teixeira. It does appear that, I guess, first pitch is going to be delayed a little bit today with the Yanks and the Rays as well up in New York. I'm curious, a couple more for you. When you look at this crop of young players, right, do you believe and I don't know how much you were able to get out of them per se. Do you believe that, do they feel that they understand the historical relevancy of, say, the core four? They're not trying to replace that, obviously. If they had any of that success, then, I mean, that's great success. But do they really kind of understand where they might be built as next, quote-unquote, the core four, or, that next crop, that next wave of great Yankees players to help maybe recreate a dynasty?
I think it's hard not to have a sense of that history when you call Yankee Stadium your office. And, I mean, the place is kind of like a living museum to the teams of the past. So I think that to replicate what that team did, I mean, that was really special. They won 4 World Series in 5 years, beginning in 1996. And, you talk about the core 4, and really Bernie Williams belongs in that group too, because the only thing he didn't do was hang around for the 09 championship. So I think that you've got big shoes to fill there, and to say you're going to go and win 4 World Series in 5 years, I think that's a tall order. But I think what you see with this group is they do believe they're a championship caliber club. I mean, they were not surprised that they were 1 win away from the World Series and going toe-to-toe with the Indians and the Astros last year. I think a lot of people outside were, but in that room, they believed they were that good, and they believed they belonged on that stage. And I think now you've retooled. You bring in a guy like Stanton who might put them over the top. I think that they're not going to sneak up on anybody this year. The target is certainly on their back, but they embrace that, and I think that they want to be viewed as a team that should go out and win the World Series, not just this year, but in years to come.
And I think it's time people – and I've heard a lot of guys start to say this, even last year, you got to start to recognize Didi Gregorius is a great shortstop. I mean, not you per se, but I think people, if they don't really watch the Yankees or the AL or watch baseball night in and night out, I mean, listen, all the pressure was on him, right, to try to basically replace a legend, and he is just a great player. He really is.
No, it's easy to say one day after he hits 2 home runs and sets a Yankee record by driving in 8 runs. That's the most ever by a shortstop. So a heck of a home opener for Didi Gregorius. But you've seen this before from him. He has a knack for coming up in the big games. You saw him in the postseason last year with the 2 home runs off Corey Kluber in the clincher against Cleveland. I mean, this is a big game, money on the line kind of player. And there were a lot of questions when he came over to the Yankees. This might go down as Brian Cashman's best trade in history because this is a guy that they picked up to not just replace Derek Jeter, which is a tall order in itself, but you always talk about how you have to be strong up the middle, and that's catcher, second base, shortstop, center field. And if you don't have a solid glove and a solid bat at shortstop, well, it's really hard to build a championship contender there. And there were a lot of questions with Didi Gregorius. I remember when he came over, people were saying, well, he can't hit left-handed pitching. They might have to platoon him with Brendan Ryan at shortstop. And obviously you look back now, and that's all laughable because he really did establish himself. After that first month, really, in pinstripes, he was trying to do a little too much. He found his groove. He settled into who he is. And I think you see a guy who has consistently gotten better year after year. And when there's runners on base and those clutch situations, that's the guy the Yankees want at the plate because he does seem to have a knack for coming through more often than not. And
you're right. It might go down as one of the, hidden gem moves of Cashman with that trade, part of that 3-team trade back in 2014. I'm curious, before I let you get out of here, what's your take on Boone? I've asked a couple of MLB guys this, and I'm curious, is there more pressure on a guy like Boone to replace Girardi with what the Yankees have, or a guy like Cora in Boston? I'm just curious to get your take on that.
Well, I think they're both tough positions to walk into as a guy without a whole lot of experience. But, just having seen Boone on a daily basis here, I think that he's settling into that job. I think there may be a little more than he anticipated to it, and I think that he anticipated a lot. We saw already the first experience where he got some heat for making a pitching move up in Toronto where they intentionally walked Josh Johnson and elected to pitch to Justin Smoke, and he burned him with a grand slam. And he's been burned by the bullpen about in the last 3 games here, and which is something you thought was going to be the Yankees' strength. So they've also had to contend with the injury bug. So there's a lot being thrown at Aaron Boone here. I think he's going to sink or swim in the position. I expect he's going to swim in it. I didn't think that the transition to the dugout and being around a clubhouse would be difficult for him. And handling the media, I think he's been good at. I wasn't shocked at that. I mean, this is a guy who was up in the broadcast booth for years, so transitioning down to the microphone downstairs shouldn't have been too much of a problem. I think that what Boone just has to do is really he's got to catch up with the speed of the game, and it looks a lot easier from the broadcast booth and the press level than it does in real time down at field level. And I think that's one thing that he's adapting to every day. I think that he's going to continue to adapt, and I don't really want to judge him off 5 games so far, but I think what you've seen so far is this is a guy who hasn't done this before, and he's going to have to learn to do it on the fly pretty quickly.
Listen, we're dealing with that in our backyard with the Phillies and Kapler after 4 games. Give the guy 25, 30 games. I think you can get a good gauge on it. But so far, kind of an inauspicious start for Kapler. Before I let you get out of here, where's the book going to be available? If you want to just give another pop before I let you get out of here, and appreciate it.
You got it. Yeah, the book is called The Baby Bombers, the inside story of the next Yankees dynasty. It's available on Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble, wherever books are sold, and put out by Diversion Books. And pick one up. It's good reading for the start of the baseball season, whether you're a Yankee fan or a fan of some other team. It's a good look into how a Major League Baseball front office works and behind the scenes of the 2017 season with the Yankees.
Brian, appreciate a couple moments. Keep up the great work with MLB.com, and congratulations on the book. Hopefully we'll get you back on when the season really kicks into gear. Appreciate a couple moments today.
You got it. Thanks for having me.
You got it. Take care of yourself, Bryan Hoch. And again, the book is Baby Bombers, Inside the Story of the new Yankees dynasty.